Slight delay, as you would understand that just waiting for a few more ladies and gentlemen to come in. My name is Pallav Bose and welcome to the second day, ladies and gentlemen, of the Khushwant Singh Literature Festival, KSLITFEST 2016. Just a very quick roundup for some of you who have joined in today. Yesterday was a wonderful session. It was very warm during the day though, but the sessions were absolutely outstanding. We began with the inaugural session with the Honorable Chief Minister of Himachal Pradesh, and Mr. Omar Abdullah and other dignitaries were there to inaugurate. The highlight of the session, which I thought was the Joy of Learning program, spread across about 200 schools in Himachal Pradesh and Punjab, and more than 1,000 school children participated in that program, and a few children walked away with the prizes and the certificates. That was a very big highlight. Then it moved on to a very interesting debate on being Khushwant Singh, where there were a lot of experts sharing their untold stories of their association with this great man. It moved to the next debate, Kashmir, where we found that Mr. Omar Abdullah was very, very brave to handle the questions, as usual, with his aura and with his dynamism and knowledge. Cinema was the next discussion. Caste, woman dominated the discussions. Very well handled by the laureates, as I would call them, Shyam Benegal Saab, Anil Dharkarji, Dalit Tahir. The last session was half attended, which obviously, if you find out today, all those who attended the last session, any one of you who attended the last session yesterday? Yeah. And you would realize that was the best session. An outstanding rendition of melodious vocals, narration and poetry. And I wish that the entire audience, which is going to miss this session as well, which is going to be an outstanding session, do not miss, because this is the opportunity. Weekend, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you spread the word around, tell them to be on time as well tomorrow, and stay till the last session before we break off for entertainment and for other things. Ladies and gentlemen, today I'm very proud and honored to introduce this gentleman whom I hear literally every day on Times Now. I don't sleep without listening to Times Now. I'm a big fan of Arnab Goswami, and the only person who balances him is this man, Mr. Maruf Raza. Absolute, very, very intelligent gentleman, absolutely knowledgeable, outstanding voice. And yesterday when I saw him, I didn't realize that he's so tall, because I met him for the first time yesterday. And he doesn't seem to be so tall on television. A commentator on Indian military and security issues and consulting editor, strategic affairs to Times Now. The show, ladies and gentlemen, Latitude, if you don't watch it, please do. It's an absolutely reflective and an extremely knowledgeable program. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall be moderating the program. With a big round of applause, Mr. Maruf Raja. Could I invite him on stage? And I also take the pleasure and the opportunity of welcoming this extremely talented, wonderful documentary filmmaker and journalist. I'm saying this with my heart, whatever little I know about him. He's done immense amount of work on strategic military affairs and strategic locations. He's considered to be an authority on Indochina, and the book 1962, The War That Wasn't, is supposed to be, by critics, one of the most well-written research books on the subject. Please welcome, ladies and gentlemen, our author and expert, Mr. Kunal Verma. Gentlemen, ladies, we have about 45 minutes, and I would obviously hand over the mic to Mr. Maruf Raza and leave it to him to handle. He's a master. And we in the audience have enough extremely esteemed ladies and gentlemen to participate in the Q&A and the discussions to follow after this. Over to you, Mr. Maruf Raza.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm absolutely honored and delighted to be here at KSLI and engaging with such an enlightened audience. I've always believed that it is not large numbers that matter. It's the people that who you can actually get across to, and they're able to understand the sensitivities of the subject. And there are many veterans here, and I'm conscious of the fact that maybe some of them have actually been through the experience of 1962 that we're going to talk about. But more of that a little later. Kunal Verma here, again, he's been introduced, but let me start by saying that 1962, the war that wasn't by Kunal, the book here with me, is an absolute historical masterpiece, because I think we needed a narrative in our country that would challenge the Maxwell story, that would challenge the established wisdom that had come to prevail in India as to how 1962 was the Himalayan blunder that it was. And I think Kunal, in his very objective way, has put it all together. So Kunal has put it together in an extremely honest and in a very well-researched account. So Kunal, I want to ask you, I mean, that's the first question that crossed my mind, looking at the sheer depth of your study, that you've been, I mean, a historian par excellence. I've read your book, The Long Road to Siachen and the Reason Why. You've written other works, you've made fantastic documentaries. But what really inspired you to put a work of this nature together, particularly because it showed that there were many people at the helm of affairs at that time who had feet of clay. And how much time did it take for you to put together this really deeply researched volume?
Good morning, everybody. The book took almost, well, in the writing it probably took 4 or 5 months, but in the entire research that went into it, I'd say it's close to 30 years, and I wouldn't really be exaggerating. I was born into Rajput. My father was a captain in 1962. In fact, the battalion had moved from here, from Sabatu. 19GR and 2 Rajput were posted here as part of 7th Brigade, and these were the 2 battalions which were moved into Nifa in 1959. 19GR went to Namkachu and 2 Rajput was allocated the Walong sector. And well, obviously I don't remember any of it, but I was too young, but my mom says my first words were the alarm call of a sambar, because that was all that we had for company. 2 Rajput was de-inducting in 1962 when they had reached Misamari, when they were about to get onto the trains, when they were told that there's trouble with the Chinese, and then they were pushed back into the Namkachu area. And that was the same thing which happened to 19GR also, which was also pulling out. And these 2 battalions had handed over all their summer, their winter clothing, their digging implements, everything to the units which are relieving them. So you've actually pushed these 2 units which have taken the brunt of the Chinese assault on the 20th of October back into the Namkachu area. And this was a story which I had to tell it, because I was born in this unit where we lost 281 men in a matter of 2 hours or something like that. And one has grown up reading everything there is about 1962, and then one was also very fortunate that in my own career I got to visit virtually each and every valley where the fighting took place. I think I've been to areas where even corps commanders who are commanding 14 corps, etc. don't go. I mean, like, I've been to every corner of Ladakh. And then when I was doing various works in the Northeast, including the Northeast trilogy, I made it a point. I used to go and sit down in the bunkers. And once you get to the terrain, the ground talks to you. I mean, you see it, it's so different. And all the writing which had been there on 1962, it was mainly army officers who were writing. My dad's written a book as well, Rivers of Silence, which deals primarily with the fighting of 2 Rajput. And one of the things which struck me was that there is this huge reluctance on the part of military writers not to comment on the civilian aspect of things at all. Now, how can you have any action or any kind of an objective military analysis of a situation and not talk about the civil aspect? So to that extent, I think I was very lucky that I didn't actually wear a rank on my shoulder, because if I did, I would have probably fallen into the same trap. And years of talking to people, years of research, it eventually all culminated with, and the story, I mean, as it emerged, it's actually very, very shocking. I'll also just take a second to comment on General Palit, who, I'll just give this as an example. I met him at the USI one day and invited him over for dinner. So he came with a bottle of Black Dog, you know, kurta pajama and very crisp and all that. And I think in that first evening that we spent together, he found that I was asking questions and I probably understood the subject. And I think he used me as a sounding board to literally admit to a lot of things which, you know, he's written an excellent book, War in the High Himalayas, which is also self-exonerating, but I think he then used me as a sounding board. Like, he talked very frankly about his role in Sela, his role vis-a-vis the Thorat papers, etc. And it was all very interesting. It's like, you know, when you're writing military history, it's like putting together a massive jigsaw puzzle. And I think at the end of it, as far as this book is concerned, I hope I've got it. I hope I've got it right.
Yeah, well, you certainly have. But just to go back to the experience of men who were thrown in, ill-equipped, ill-prepared, ill-informed, ill-briefed. I mean, there were a whole lot of things. Senior officers sitting here who are battle-hardened and experienced will agree with us that, you know, you owed a little more to your men that you were pushing up into those icy heights. You had to give them a fair chance to fight back, both in terms of the equipment, the weapon systems, the ammunition, the clothing. Everything was wrong, but I'm going to come to that a little later. Here, you know, in your opening, you've quoted here this very poignant kind of poem by Haji Malik, who's written about Namkachu, the famous Battle of Two Rajput, in which he said, "We died unsuccored, helpless, we were your soldiers, men of bravery and pride." And then in the end, you've gone on to say, "Let this be your inheritance and our unwritten epitaph." And I think you've done that. But what I would like you to throw more light on, and something you touched on right now, you know, most of the military writing or military history that's come out in India has come out by military officers, because and I've heard eminent speakers say this in public forums, say that we as a people don't really have a sense of history. And it's very important, therefore, that history should be seen in its entirety. The second thing is, and I think it's equally important to understand, as you brought out, that even military decisions are not taken in isolation. They had to be politico-military decisions. And as your book brings out, it is unfair to put the blame only on the political leadership, because there is a point, and I want to quote that more from the writings of some other historians in recent time, that the military leadership of the Indian Army at that time must share a lot of the blame. They kind of just let go. They allowed and this was post the standoff between Pandit Nehru, Krishna Menon and General Thimaya, that Thimaya took a back seat, and after Thimaya did that, others also took a back seat, and there were individuals who emerged, particularly General Beji Kaul, who really had no track record of showing any capability to lead India in such a situation. So quite clearly the military leadership, I think your book is probably the first book, other than some writings, one of them is Srinath Raghavan's writings in recent time, that has said that the military leadership must share the blame. Otherwise, most of the blame is put on Pandit Nehru and Krishna Menon. Would you like to elaborate?
I mean, you're saying it. The issue is that military leadership cannot absolve itself for what happened. In fact, Thorat emerges as a bit of a hero in my book, but he is also a villain. So is Thimaya. How could you let it happen? I mean, this is not something which happened overnight. And I think these you can say, right, he got played, he got this happened, the resignation drama, etc. was forced down his throat. But the responsibility is collective. I mean, we've got troops. Now let's just take the example of the Galwan Valley in Ladakh. I'll just give you one example where the Gurkhas went and set up the post. They were entirely using animal transport to get across, and Galwan Valley is back off to the beyond. I mean, it's just incredible. And they had 100 pack animals, which were basically yaks and mules. 70% of those animals, these are the hardiest animals under the sun, they died. And these men, they've gone there with and they built those posts with their hands. And they made a little helipad itself, and then they started coming in and stuff like that. Now your men, whether it was in Namkachu, when we pushed these 2 battalions back in sweaters and Angola shirts, they're crossing Sela. Everybody is vomiting because of the high altitude, but they carried on. They got there. And then you go and deploy them in the most stupid manner possible, and then despite that, they stuck it out. When we say, okay, Dalvi's book, he talks a lot in that book. In fact, I quoted him left, right and center and then analyzed what he himself has said. Dalvi was the biggest failure of command. He was the brigade commander. There's no point whining about what Nehru and Krishna Menon are doing. You owe it to those 3 battalions. They are looking at you. You are the brigade commander. Why aren't you taking those decisions? On the 19th, he himself talks about how he almost had a mental breakdown and how he went and lay down. You don't expect that from commanders. He spoke to his GOC, said कि हम तो मरने वाले हैं. GOC is also whining away, saying कि I'll come and die with you. 2 battalion commanders overheard that conversation. They bhagwat from there later. And again, after 62, we simply were not ruthless enough. We should have looked at what happened and we should have got rid of these guys. Most of them came back as brigade commanders and GOCs in 65 and 71, and they let you down again. I'll give you one example. The CEO of 9 Punjab, he actually ran away from it. And in 71, this man undid everything the Indian Army did in Bangladesh by stealing gold, and he was caught, and he was court-martialed for it later. So, the army has a structure. The army has its own command and control. Nehru's greatest failure was he started tampering with that. The moment he started playing the BG call card, which there were various factors for it. I don't necessarily buy that theory that Nehru only promoted BG call because he was related to his wife. I don't think so. I think there were certain aspects of BG call which were quite attractive. When you talk to a lot of people, including the children of people like General Daulat Singh and Thorat's son, etc., they say they were mesmerized by this guy. Because all the other generals had this, they were what we refer to as the brown sahib. They were very brought up in this British kind of culture, and Vijay Kaul was into Hindi plays. There was something about the man which obviously there was something about him, but militarily he was a disaster, and they kept reporting on him. He was reported on as a colonel because when the INA trials were going on, he started giving papers which he should never have given to the political people. And that is what led to him becoming very popular with Nehru, etc. Then Nehru picked him up and sent him to the valley as his political advisor, and he oversaw the arrest of Sheikh Abdullah. He was commented on adversely in Korea by the Thorat Timaya combined. In fact, I've seen that SCR. It actually says this man is incompetent. But Nehru intervened. Then again, he was the GOC of 4 Division in Ambala. Again they say he's incompetent. Again the Prime Minister intervenes. You do not intervene and you do not fiddle around with the military structure. The moment you do that, and you put officers there who are incapable of understanding the overall picture, you are in serious trouble. Vijay Kaul's own book, The Untold Story, he doesn't know the difference between Sela and Chela. Sela is spelled S-E, La, and the other one is T-S-E, La. He's mistaken the two. He's the corps commander. How the hell do you expect the guys on the ground to fight if the corps commander doesn't know where your main defenses are?
In fact, Kunal, you've talked about that in great detail in your book about the deployment of troops, how some commanders on the ground initially got the deployment right, but superior officers prevailed on them purely on the basis of their understanding of the situation on the map. Those of us who served in the armed forces know there's a lot of difference between what the map says and the tracks and the nalas on the ground, which are completely different. And unless you've gone on the ground, you are really disconnected. But I want to get on to, I don't want to go into too much detail about individuals at this stage, but what I want to understand from you, and this is in our conversation, and again it's reflected sometimes in your book, Mao Zedong's shadow over this whole game. Two aspects I want you to throw light on. One is Nehru's meeting with Zhou Enlai, in which you talked about how Panditji was the great emerging world leader, talking about various issues which were happening in the world. And the Chinese were very focused. The Chinese kept saying, take Arunachal or take Nifa, give us Aksai Chin. So I want you to elaborate on that, and with that I want to bring out that how Aksai Chin was, by the time we woke up to it, and why did we wake up to it so late? It was a no-go area for our troops, and that in many ways, and not so much as the forward policy, which you say was a good policy but badly implemented, was really the place where the blame lies for the standoff with the Chinese.
You see, there was a lot, like in my book, there's a lot about call, the negative, certain aspects about call which are positive. There's a lot of negatives about Krishna Menon. Can't think of very many positives in his case. But in the case of Nehru, there was a lot about Nehru which was very good. I mean, you can't just take a black brush and completely paint it with it. But in my earlier book, The Long Road to Siachen, I had gone to the Nehru Memorial Center, and I found the transcripts which had been actually done by Krishna Menon himself of 8 hours of discussions between Nehru and Zhou Enlai. All 1956, 54, 56, that period. And it's amazing stuff. I mean, looking at this, what the hell is this? I mean, Nehru, and I think today's leadership is making the same mistake, by the way, and we'll come to that point a little later. The moment you have your policies dictated by a very powerful leader, his position, his global position then becomes a weakness, and the other side is watching you, whether it's Pakistan or China. They're studying you. They see a crack, they will go through it. And that's what's happened with Nehru. And if you look at that transcript, Nehru's going on and on. Your Excellency, Peru this, Angola this, that, and then he pauses. It says, Nehru reaches out for a glass of water. Zhou Enlai says, give me Aksai Chin, you take Nifa. Then Nehru again ignores what he said. He goes on and on about something else, and again he takes a break. Again, one line from Zhou Enlai, you give me Aksai Chin, you take Nifa. They were very clear. They wanted Aksai Chin, and they were going to get Aksai Chin no matter what. And we failed to understand the geopolitical scenario at that time. Aksai Chin was always an area which was going to be a bit in doubt, because the state forces had a post over there, but we withdrew it in 1947. But there was no Indian presence in the Aksai Chin. But then, for that matter, there was no Singh presence in the Aksai Chin either, or Tibetan presence in the Aksai Chin. Aksai Chin is a huge flat soda plain of some quarter of half. This is a deserted country. But the Chinese, initially, when they went into Lhasa, you see, before annexing Lhasa, they had annexed Xinjiang. And after taking Xinjiang, they've cut through the Aksai Chin and they've gone that way. So when they took over Lhasa, they went through what later became the highway which went through the area. And for Nehru to say, and this is Nehru's biggest fault, because of after Panchsheel, he had already committed himself to, as this global leader who wanted peace and this, that, etc. And the Chinese had played him after that, because the moment Panchsheel was signed, the cartographic aggression, etc. all started. And Nehru was warned again and again, because the MA, the military attaché in Peeping at that time, Beijing, as we know it today, has written to him twice. First he said they're building this highway, and this letter is I think 1953, just before the Panchsheel agreement, and then he writes to him again. It's all ignored. And in 1957, when the Chinese press announced the construction of this highway, we've ignored it. We've denied it. Nehru's denied it in Parliament. It is only in 1959, after the Longju incident, that this whole thing has suddenly erupted and hit you in the face. And by that time, the way television channels react today, the national media at that time had absolutely gone berserk. And it played a huge role in the subsequent events.
Okay, that's what I'm coming to. Again, 2-3 quick points. One is the forward policy. You know, generally people blame Panditji for becoming too aggressive with the deployment of troops well beyond the given line, which was the Indian perception line or the Chinese perception line, the McMahon line, which came out of the 1914 Shimla Agreement, and where again you said that the chap who came from Tibet was completely on the ball. He knew exactly where the demarcation of the line lay, whereas there was a lot of ambiguity surrounding, you know, how much were we willing to trade off. But more importantly, the forward policy. Now, the forward policy you've said here was a good policy, but badly implemented. And also, we made a mistake of forgetting the famous dictum that he who carries the big stick rules the roost. Then again, you said B.N. Malik, the intelligence chief, was really one who had warned the Indian government well in advance what the Chinese were planning upon. But then it was B.N. Malik who got the forward policy implemented. So really, if he knew the Chinese intent, why did he ruffle the Chinese feathers by getting the forward policy, for which Mao apparently decided to teach us a lesson? So elaborate a bit on that before I come on to Arun.
The forward policy was a brilliant policy. Let's be very clear about it. Everybody talks about the Anderson Brooks report, but let's go back to the Khushwant Singh report and the Himmat Singh report. Himmat Singh ji report actually defined your forward policy in NIFA, because it was basically dealing with the Assam rifles, etc. If it had not been done, we would have lost NIFA the way we lost Aksai Chin. The Chinese would have rolled it. Secondly, the Chinese had no claim. I mean, what are we talking about? China didn't have a border with us in 1947, and their interpretation of the border has been accepted by everybody. I mean, you know, we have been so ham-handed in our handling of this whole thing. Ministry of External Affairs in the 60s have given the Chinese a map of NIFA. And Fishtail 1 and Fishtail 2 are Mishni hunting areas. Those two loops, even on your India King's cigarette packet, those two loops are visible. Army maps are the only ones which say Hamara Zameen hai. We have, you know, left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Nobody knows where NIFA is. Nobody knows where Ladakh is. And we've just gone, you know, we just stumbled along happily. The forward policy, I mean, there is no question. This is the boundary. We have to protect it. We had to push troops up. But having pushed those men up, what are you going to do now? You've got to give them the weapons. You've got to give them the fighting ability. And then, again, the problem with Malik was that he became the bureaucrat who became the de facto NSA of today. He was taking the decisions, he was implementing them. There was nobody in the army who was willing to stand up to him. He had the same intelligence reports. His interpretation was Chinese kuch nahi karenge. Everybody bought it. The DMO, the DMI, everybody, the army chiefs, they had the same reports. Certainly, the Air Force chief, they just gullible. What was they? They were gullible fellows who couldn't read and write. I mean, they had to arrive at their own perception. So to blame Malik for everything is wrong. Malik has played a very positive role. When the Indian army has withdrawn from Tezpur, he has actually airlifted the police forces from Gujarat and Tamil Nadu and said, I will very well fight to the last and we will hold the ground here. So I don't actually subscribe to the theory that you can blame Malik for everything that went wrong. The forward policy was, it had to be done. But you see, there again, Nehru's fluctuating character comes into play. Because when Bob Khating went to Tawang, Nehru actually got mad at him. He said, why did you go? Because you see, you must understand that NIFA was actually not under the Ministry of Defence. In fact, the Eastern Army Commander was banned from going into NIFA till 1959, when Nehru suddenly in Parliament announced that he is handing over to the army.
Okay, that's where I want to come in, because that was the start of the whole Thimaya incident. Because when he announced that I'm handing...
But before we come to that, one sec, sorry. We got to also look at, this is again, I'm still on the B.M. Malik point. You see, when the Thorat, when he did his appreciation as the Eastern Army Commander at Lal Killa, his whole concept was based on a defensive line which was going to be built across the middle of Arunachal. or not even middle, about 1/3 on our side. He said, let the Assam rifle posts be early warning things and let them harass the Chinese when they come. We will fight them, and we will fight them at what? And the axis was very simple. It was Bomdila on the west, and whirling on the extreme east, and everything in between. The line running roughly through Dapurijo and along and stuff like that. But Malik said, no, we are going to fight them on the crest line. And nobody in the army had the gumption or the guts to stand up and say you're talking rubbish. Because Thorat's logic was absolutely clear. He said, look, the southern side of the Himalayas are a logistic nightmare. If instead of us having to bear the brunt of the entire thing, let the Chinese also. And let me tell you, had this happened, the Assam Rifles, if you look at their performance in World War II as V Force, they were outstanding. They harassed. You play to your strengths, not to your weaknesses. But Malik, by interfering over there on the defensive line, actually did us more damage than everybody blames him for the forward policy. This is what I actually hold him accountable for.
Okay, good. You clarified that. But now I want you to throw light on what really happened between Panditji, Krishna Menon and Thimaya, leading to Thimaya's resignation, the withdrawal of the resignation. You talked about it in detail in the book, but just summarize for the audience here. And also point your fingers on the guilty military commanders that we should hold them guilty for. Bogi Sen, Eastern Army Commander, General Thorat, was he guilty or not about his strategy, as you just talked about, letting the Chinese roll onto the plains and we will fight on the plains?
Not at the plains.
Assam.
Footage, big difference.
Footage. Yeah, then you have General Monty Pallit, then Brigadier Pallit, the DMO. What role did he play? Did he know enough? Was his war in the high Himalayas as a kind of his clarification that, I want to give my story before I go into my grave. So, these things need to be highlighted, and also the Air Force factor and Air Marshal Engineer's role in accepting quietly the intelligence assessment, which then had the Air Force intervene, would the war, the conflict, because you've also said in the book that in all, the total operational involvement of troops were probably a brigade plus minus. We call it a war, but if you really see the fighting that took place, wasn't even worth a division. I mean, just to put it in perspective for those who are not familiar with matters military, that in Kargil we had more than 2 divisions, almost Jalpuris here, but more than 2 divisions who were fighting on the front line. Here on the front line in 62, there are 3 brigades make a division, and here you had probably a brigade plus that was fighting between Ladakh and Nifa. Clear all those military aspects before I go to the last question and then open up to the audience.
Ladakh, the battle was fought in October and then again in November. In October, 2 companies were involved, 5 yard, fantastic performance. But what could those boys do? You have 5 fellows, 10 fellows sitting holding a picket. You go to any condominium or even in your houses in Kasoli, you'll have more security guards holding it, than what we were expecting these fellows to do. They didn't stand a chance. There were two companies involved, and then there were 2 companies involved again in November when the Chinese attack has come. And whether we talk of Rezangla or we talk of Gurungel, I mean, Rezangla was a disaster. What the hell was the brigade commander doing? And why did he withdraw? It makes no sense to me at all. And these are questions which nobody's ever asked. I mean, we treat Ladakh as a victory. We stopped the Chinese. We abandoned our positions and we ran from there. What the hell were we doing? We flew tanks in. We got them out. The Air Force brought in AMX tanks. They got them there. Massive effort. Chandan Singh landing there, etc. I mean, fantastic. And then what do? You get them out. So there's a lot of unanswered things also in the entire thing. And in Nifa, it's 1 brigade being wiped out, 7 brigade being wiped out on the first day because they didn't fight. I mean, they fought. The men fought from the bunkers, but from every fixed position when we were in a position to give them a good fight. Like in Bumla, 1 Sikh was performing extremely well. 1 company. But instead of reinforcing it, what the hell did Bogi Sen do? He lands there and he orders the divisional commander to abandon the area and fall back on Bomdila. In the meantime, Monty Pallit comes out to the scene and he says, no, hang on. We'll fight at Sela. It's accepted. Then you build up a division there, you sack all your commanders, you bring new fellows, they don't know what the hell's going on. And when the attack came, they were caught with their pants down. They were caught with their pants down. Whether it was Anand Patania in Dhiran, he was sitting in Dhiran. The Chinese High Command knew that our 4 Division headquarters was at Dhiran. The Indian High Command didn't even know it. They thought they were at Singh till the attack came. So call it a war is a joke. I mean, one infantry battalion in Ladakh and just about a brigade plus in the whole of NIFA is nothing. And these are various factors which all need to be looked at. But let's just again come back to this whole point of that everything is not black and white. There's a lot of grey. Let's take the case of Bogi Sen, which Baruch just picked on. He's the Eastern Army commander. This man in 1947-48 was the brigade commander of 161 Brigade. Some of you may be familiar with this very, very well written book, Slender Was the Thread. This man was a hero. He saved the valley full. But what happened to him as an army commander? He was an absolute blooming disaster. He wouldn't do a thing. And again, Kaul, when he came back from Namkachu on the 10th of October, after the first aborted push by the Punjabis had been stopped by the Chinese, Kaul, to his credit, came back and told Nehru in that meeting in Nehru's house. He said, look, this is a disaster. We've got to get out of here. But by that time, the Thapar, Bogi Sen, which were harboring their own personal grudges about the way things were going with this man being above them, yet below him, etc., decided to take a stand. The biggest villain in 1962, ladies and gentlemen, is not Krishna Menon, it is not Nehru, it is not this or the other, it is actually Bogi Sen. He was the Eastern Army commander. He should have fought. Nilufer's uncle, Mr. Rustamji has written a book on his version of what happened in the Northeast, and he actually quotes a paragraph of Bogi Sen, where he's talking really big. I mean, he says, the Chinese come, we'll treat the bastards like this and we'll throw them out here, etc. But he actually didn't do a thing. He was a negative character in the entire thing. Now let's come to the Air Force aspect. In Korea, the Chinese had initially overrun the American forces. And what changed the entire tide and the Americans managed to push them back to the 37th parallel, etc., was the USAF. Now the Chinese were very aware of this. And in Namkachu, on the Thagla Ridge, on the day of the attack, they spent, not the day of the attack, in the week preceding the attack, they spent more time putting anti-aircraft guns than artillery guns. Because they knew if the Air Force gets involved, they'd actually had it. Now, there's a lot of reasons for, the Air Force was in this whole denial mode. In 1992, I was doing this film, Salt of the Earth, which was the history of the IAF, and my wife Dipti and I were sitting with Air Marshal Dewan, who was CNC Eastern Air Command in 1971. We had gone to talk to him about his role in the Arakans in 1947-48. And when we finished, I was about to switch off the tape recorders when he says, Kunal, 1 minute, I want to say something. He says, BG Kaul has got all the credit for 1962. They've forgotten about me. I was startled. I said, what the hell is he talking about? And what credit is he talking about? He said, no, I was equally close to Panditji. I used to play bridge with him. And the reason why the Air Force was not used was because of me. I quoted this in Long Road to Siachen, and then it became, when we played these tapes to air headquarters, you should have seen their faces. I mean, because here the whole generation would grown up believing that was Nehru's fault. So I said, what are you talking about? So he said, I was in 7th Squadron, I flew Hurricanes, we were looking for the Japanese, I never saw them. And he said, here's my logbook, 471 sorties, I never saw the Japs. So I told Nehru ji, Pandit ji, agar hum wahan jayenge, we will not see the Chinese. There's a difference. I asked him, have you ever flown in NIFA? He said, no. But in NIFA, they were confined to the valleys. They had to come through passes. We had hunters. We had misters. We had tufanis. We had pilots who were exceptionally good. More than that, Jagannath, the Canberra guy, was flying up and down in impunity. He came back with photographs of everything on the Chinese side. He used to cross over at KK Pass, Karakoram Pass, which is now near Siachen, Daulat Beg Oldie, cross over, zigzag, and you see, because the Chinese have roads leading up to all their gun positions and all, you know exactly where they are. He came back with photographs. Daulat Singh has signed his own citation giving him an MBC for this, saying he came back with every photograph, and then they say we didn't know what was going on. I mean, look at the contradiction. He come back with number plates of every vehicle. And then he'd fly along the northern side of the Great Himalaya and come back from the Lohit River and come and land in Agra. Again and again and again. And the Chinese never once managed to put up a fighter to intercept this aircraft. There was a Chinese aircraft, which a MiG 20, I think it was a MiG 19 guy who had actually landed in Formosa. The Americans had got hold of him and they offered him to the Indian intelligence. We refused for whatever reason, because Nehru didn't want to ruffle the Chinese feathers. But we got the intelligence papers. That guy was very clear. The Chinese had actually run afoul with the Russians because of having, once they had taken Xinjiang, तब से problem चल रही थी. And they did not have aviation fuel. They didn't have runways in Tibet to get airborne. And yet, this is the biggest mystery of the war. The IB puts up this analysis that they're going to bomb Madras, they will bomb Calcutta, they will do this, they will do that. And Aspie engineer, he just accepted it. Ladies and gentlemen, are you aware of the fact that the Navy was involved in this? We had Seahawks and Alizes at Gorakhpur. Pilots were flying with the transport boys. They were looking at every bridge. They didn't have GPSs and stuff like that, but we knew exactly what to do. In Chushul, in the Spangur Gap, there was a 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer, 4 kilometer long lines of the Chinese coming. I mean, we didn't even need to bomb them. We just needed to drop a little bit of napalm there. It was enough for the oxygen to be sucked up, and it would have been a difference. And the Chinese knew this, but we didn't do it. We let our guys down. Our men were there, but you know, whether it's the political leadership, the bureaucracy played a major role, because MJ Desai and Malik were the two fellows who were literally calling the shots with nobody willing to question them. And the top leadership of the Indian Army at that time, and the top leadership of the Indian Army before that, absolute disaster. I mean, you cannot let this happen. You have the finest troops in the world, but if you do not lead them, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot each and every time. You're doing it today also.
That actually takes me, that brings me to the last question, and you kind of led me onto it. The men on the ground. For them, it didn't matter who were the so-called guilty men of 62, who we normally blame for the debacle that was. And you've said Nehru, Menon, Malik, these were the three personalities that most influenced the events and shaped the destiny in 1962. But for the men on the ground, what mattered at most were their commanders. And many of their commanders let them down. I'm not talking of the Eastern Army commander who you've given your opinion about. But what about Brigadier Dalvi? What about Niranjan Prasad? What about many commanding officers who left them? So what is the lesson that we take away from here? What is the essential takeaway of your book in your mind? Is it an obituary to every man who fought to his last man, last bullet, and who stood his ground? And I know people from your father's battalion, when ammunition ran out, they fought with sticks and stones. What was motivating them when their commanders were letting them down?
The Indian soldier will never let you down, let me tell you. I've operated with them. I've flown with them. I filmed the Kargil War. General Puri was there. I was with him for a while, but I spent more time with 3 Division. I filmed everything. Wherever the GOC went, I went with him. I've seen these boys. I've seen our troops in action. They are always, in Kargil, everybody was moving forward despite massive artillery fire and stuff like that. I've never seen a guy hesitate. It's leadership. And the biggest takeaway, the book is, of course it's an obituary to everybody who died there, but the book is actually a plea more than anything else to the Indian political leadership, because they are the guys who are eventually going to call the shots. For God's sake, firstly insulate the army from all this crap which is going on. Do not discuss these things. Leave them alone. They are a first-class fighting organization. But the army is like an insurance policy. Until things go wrong, you don't give a damn about them. You actually hesitate to pay that premium. And that's what's happening. When all these debates about OROP, this, that, etc. It's just crazy. And suddenly you have this raid in Uri, which is a routine thing. And suddenly you're talking about, but you're creating a problem for yourself when you start behaving like this. You have to have a very well thought out policy. The army is not a joke. War is not a joke. General Puri is here. He's the head GOC is going to be speaking later, I think tomorrow morning. He he'll be the first one to tell you that in our lifetime, all of us who were in Kargil, we don't want to see it again. We don't want to see any of our boys die. And yet, we are losing people left and right. I mean, in Chandel, 22 Dogra boys were killed. 12 boys from Assam Rifles were killed in Mon. 18 boys were killed over here. This is a failure on the ground. There's somebody is sleeping somewhere. But to blame him alone is wrong. Again, it's a systems failure. You're not giving them enough. You're not giving them enough. You tamper with your... We've had scam after scam after scam in defense procurement. I mean, we are going to pay the price for it in a very big way when the time comes. Who's there? We've got to leave the army alone. Their systems are very good. Do not tamper with it. And when the time comes, they will deliver. The problems begin when you start playing favorites, when you start bringing in your caste elements, you start doing all kinds of nonsense, which we are past masters. In this country, we do nothing else. And when the chips are down, we are going to the railway station, doodh ki baatiyan bhar ke, and suddenly Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan, but otherwise, oh, bloody fellow who stand over there, don't bloody come in my way. This is not correct. And we've got to handle this with sensitivity, and we've got to handle this with a larger perspective, and for that, military awareness is something, and history is a very major part of this. I mean, I'm going from school to college, talking wherever they invite us, we have always said yes, and we go. Simply, and the responses are fantastic. I mean, we say children are not interested today. My foot. I've spoken to all kinds of schools. Not one of them moves. And the questions they ask. In Welham Boys the other day, I actually turned around and asked the principal, I said, ma'am, have you primed them about 62? She said, yes. We told them you're coming, and for 2 weeks they've been researching. And the questions they were asking were superb. You know, we've got to let it's a story where all of us play a role, national security. I'm going to just take one example at the end of it and then wind up my bit. In Kandahar, when we had the aircraft had been hijacked, how did Pakistan get off the hook? Because some of those fellows produced an Indian passport, which had been fudged. Some dalal in Bombay had been paid $500, not even $1,000, $500 he farzi passport bana do hamare. And he got it done. Now that guy, for him, is routine. Yeah, he probably takes $500 from 100 people in a day and gets a passport made. But he created a chink in your national security. If you tell him, ki, bhaiya, tumhare karan ye hua hai, he'll probably look blank. He'll never be able to put the dots together. Whether it is the army leadership, whether it is the bureaucrats, whether it is the political aspect, or whether it is all of us as individuals, it's just that one crack that the enemy is looking for, and they'll come through it. And they will come at you, because we are in a very, very sensitive position in the global scenario, and we cannot just take things lightly. We can prepare for war, and if we are prepared for war, that is our only hope for peace. Because if we think that chalta hai and our Indian soldier is a great guy, he will save us every time, sooner or later you're going to get it in the neck.
Well, we've done 40 minutes. I don't know how we are with time. If you want questions and answer sessions, it's fine. Right, sir. But we can take about 3 or 4.
1 sec. Before we take the questions, Mr. Anand Sethi would like to just say 2 sentences about his uncle who was killed in on the Tangdar area. Please. Take my mic.
Thank you, Kunal. Thank you also for an excellent presentation and an excellent book, ladies and gentlemen. I'm just doing an addendum. First of all, I have to thank Kunal because he's the only one who has written about the only Air Force casualty of the 1962 war, which happened to be my mother's younger brother. Until 2012, literally, from 20th October 1962 until 2012, nobody in this country knew what happened to one Air Force officer and his passenger, an Army major. I have brought this photograph here. I obtained it from some of the same sources that Kunal has used, which is Chinese intelligence. I will not go into the story, but you can actually see the chopper on ground surrounded by Chinese troops. To confirm that it was my uncle's helicopter, we got another photograph which gives the actual number of that chopper which was shot down. It's all in one piece. It was not shot down. You can read about what that actual event that he landed. First of all, he refused to carry General Niranjan Prasad because he said it's more important to restore communication with Brigadier Dalby's brigade. So he carries a Major Ram Singh with the radio sets at the back of his chopper. They land. Kunal has quoted a particular officer who is still alive, lives in the outskirts of Chandigarh, now retired as a brigadier. He was then the second lieutenant commanding the artillery post overlooking that little helipad.
That's right. Tiger Bear.
The story from there on, the rest is in the book and please read it. But let me put the record straight, and this is where the Indian system has failed. Not only my uncle, Major Ram Singh, his daughter, and the rest of us Indians. He comes out, my uncle comes out of the aircraft, and suddenly the Chinese start firing at him. He asks Major Ram Singh to run this on the left. You can't see it because of the light here, but there's a little rock formation. He asks Major Ram Singh to run with his radio sets to hide when he takes out his revolver and starts giving covering fire. The actual first casualty of an officer and the only Air Force casualty was my uncle. He was shot dead right next to that chopper. Major Ram Singh almost made it to that rock formation, was killed on the spot just next to the rocks. From that day on, this country forgot about these two people until my wife and I, we found this brigadier retired. And to conclude, I said, why have you not told anybody from 62 until 2012? And he broke down, I broke down, my wife started crying. His wife said, he came back, he was a second lieutenant, he was taken prisoner the same evening. Taken then on to Tibet as a prisoner of war. When they came back, they were ill-treated, they were shoved into a detention center in Pune. And I will not go through the details, but he cracked. He completely cracked, and he decided he was never going to tell this story. But here's the great coincidence. Major Ram Singh's daughter grows up, marries a young lad in the army, who then goes on to command 17 Para Field, which is the same artillery Pulton from Agra, where the brigadier comes from. Atul, my dear schoolmate, is here. He knows the Pulton. And Brigadier Sahab had gone to Agra for a function, and there he meets Choti. This is Major Ram Singh's daughter. That's when she questions him, and why have you never told us? That's when he has broken down and he says, I have to tell the story. So ladies and gentlemen, my uncle died trying to save an army officer. And the country, the headquarters completely forgot about them until now. Kunal has actually broken that story in print. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I'm told we are completely short of time, so okay. There's a number of questions that came in here, but we can only take one out of this, which seems to really address the issue, which says that the master-slave structure still exists with new names. Leaders and followers. A leader's army is his followers against the other leaders, and therefore leaders live, followers are killed and honored. Your comments?
Says it all, doesn't it? But this master-slave structure, this is something which I think this is the other aspect of something we need to understand in this country, because you just take the Indo-Pak war, for example. Since partition, we've built this huge animosity between ourselves, but we've inherited a war. It was actually the West which created Pakistan because they wanted the oil fields. Even Kashmir has been created by them. We've just gone along without understanding ho kya raha hai. And those, you know, and all the carnages and everything that happened after that, you build up your own thing. But we have never really understood, and I think to a great extent we've been played and our own leadership again. You have to understand geopolitics to even have a chance. We've just fallen into this thing and just gone blindly at it. So, sir, your question.
Yeah, my question is, what is so volatile about the Henderson-Brooks report that it is just not coming out, except for that 190 pages that came out by Neville Maxwell or whatever it was? Why isn't it coming out after all these years? What is so volatile about it?
So frankly speaking, I don't think there is anything volatile about it. It cannot be. Because when General Chaudhary became the chief, in his exuberance he announced that he was giving them a carte blanche to study the entire war. But the first thing the government did, which Awan did, which was the defense minister, he said, sorry, just look at 4 core operations. 4 core didn't exist before 5th October. It's a lot of work, there's a lot of tactical aspects into the whole thing. But let me also tell you that what Neville Maxwell has put out, etc., is not the Henderson-Brooks report. It is a summary which was written by General Chaudhary himself. I flew to Bombay a few days back and I spent some time with Mr. Pradhan, who was Jawan's secretary. He claims he is the only man who's actually read the entire thing and it has been sealed. And my own guess is that the day the boundary issue with China is settled, the Henderson-Brooks report will be made public. Before that, making it public would probably also be wrong. Because the area which we are probably, which may be under Chinese control, etc., but the fact is, why play your hand before the thing is actually demarcated?
Also, 2 quick points. One is that in the Henderson-Brooks report, the terms of reference were limited largely to the military issues involved, and so therefore the report had a very narrow focus. Almost everything that is to be known in terms of lessons learned and lessons identified by the Henderson-Brooks report is already in public discourse. The only thing, and if you remember that the current Finance Minister of India, who when in opposition was one of those strong votaries of making it public, but when he came and was for a short time also Defence Minister, he said that we don't want to make it public. And from my understanding, it was that there are some map references, grid references, certain locational issues on the report, which the government, as Kunal said, doesn't want to go public with, so that our negotiating position would be weakened on the subject, and that is what they want to keep it right now out of the public debate. Once it's settled and the boundary issue is settled, which I don't know if it will be settled in my lifetime, but the fact is that if it is settled, then it will come out. But really, there are no serious skeletons in the cupboard. The only reason why it was made classified was it was assumed, I'm told, by Pandit Ji and others, that if they find faults with how the military operations are handled, eventually the finger would point to Pandit Ji and Krishna Menon, because they were so intensely involved with the military operations, and therefore to prevent that thing getting out of hand, it was at that point of time said that let sleeping dogs lie, and therefore it is. But there's no great secret which will make India a superpower because of that report comes out. That's my understanding.
I think that Time's Up is very, very prominent now. So
we need to wrap it up. Yeah. I'm so sorry.
But I think please give Kunal a great hand. And he's just a friend. But I would recommend those of you who wish to please pick up a copy of this book. I think it's a great learning exercise. Kunal's done a great service to the nation. And I think it's good. He said, I wish I'd gone to my dad's battalion. I said, if you'd gone to your dad's battalion, you would have never written this book. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
thank you very much.
I think the question answer sessions could continue with their personal meetings. Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated, because I think it's absolute pin drop silence. An outstanding session, and could we have a bigger round of applause once again? Untold stories, what a session, what a session. Some of you joined in late, so let's carry on. Thank you, Mr. Maruf Raza, and thank you very, very much, our esteemed author here. We carry on this session. Before we break for tea, one more session, ladies and gentlemen, as we shift focus from China to Pakistan. So that means the pin drop silence continues. We have our esteemed speakers. We have our esteemed speakers. Without wasting any more time, I would like to invite them on stage, on the dais, and straight away move. Venkat Pulipala, the author of the critically acclaimed Creating a New Medina, State Power, Islam and the Quest for Pakistan in Late Colonial North India. He's a professor, ladies and gentlemen, Associate Professor of History at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington, where he teaches courses in South Asian and global history. Mr. Venkat Pulipala, our first expert on the dais. Our next expert, ladies and gentlemen, I can't see him here, is an esteemed, oh, he's here. Needs no introduction, literally, but then I do it as a protocol. I mean, a former cabinet minister, ladies and gentlemen, of external affairs, an outstanding lawyer, happens to be my senior. When I went to college, his name was taken as one of the outstanding alumni that we had in St. Stephen's, and of course, a teacher of law. He's going to be our next expert, Mr. Salman Khurshid. Could we have a big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen? One small announcement that Rahul wants to make is all the authors and delegates and invitees need to pick up their coupons after this from the author's desk. Our third speaker, ladies and gentlemen, is very, very interesting so far as I am concerned. He happened to be a supporter of the Naxal movement when he was a student of Delhi University, and I know where it comes from. And he is a professor at one of the very esteemed university, at one of the very esteemed colleges in the North Campus. We all come from the same region, actually. Please welcome an outstanding journalist, an outstanding educationist, an outstanding teacher, and a follower of history, Mr. Dilip Simian, to join in the dais. And Creating a New Medina, an idea of Pakistan. I'm sure it's going to be absolute pin drop silence. I hand over the microphone to Mr. Salman Khurshid to take it forward, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I think that we've had a terrific feast of ideas this morning. But I promise you, looking at this book as I have, we have a lot more in store for our distinguished audience. I welcome Venkat Pulipala. We've chatted a little bit in the morning. Didn't have a chance to speak to Dilip Simian, but he will bring in, I'm sure, an interesting perspective on this. I do believe, and I said to Venkat in the morning, that it's a tersely researched, a very tightly packed book. Has a huge amount of historical detail about the birth of the idea of Pakistan, and then obviously, consequently, the establishment of Pakistan, and a beginning of a saga of great unpleasantness, with sporadic few moments of hope between our two countries. But essentially, I do believe, and I let the author speak for himself. Essentially, I do believe that this book provides insights into the way we look at our neighbors today. And I do know that as we speak, we are at a moment of near crisis. We are at a moment where emotions are under great stress for good reason. But I do believe that this is the kind of gathering in which even very difficult subjects, as you heard in the previous discussion, even very difficult and distressful subjects can be discussed very objectively. So over to you, Venkat. Please tell us a little bit about the book, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, can you hear me? Even in the previous session, you had discussions of responsibilities that could be pinned on major protagonists in the drama of 1962, for example. But my book tries to get away from the great protagonists on which our attention is always riveted upon, be it Mountbatten, Jinnah, Gandhi, Nehru, because that's one strand of history in which you have an attempt to pin down the responsibility of who caused the partition of India. And an enormous amount of ink has been spilled on this question and continues to be spilled on it. My question was more, or rather the book deals more with how the idea of Pakistan is actually articulated, how it is popularly understood, and how popular mobilization happens. Because after all, if Mr. Jinnah claims to be, and in fact becomes, let's say, the supreme leader of the Indian Muslims, sole spokesman, as he is known as, there is a reason the Muslim League attains enormous popularity. So the question is, what is the idea of Pakistan with which they go to the public, and how is it that they elicit support? And I argue that contrary to the existing body of historical scholarship, wherein the consensus seems to be that Pakistan is this tremendously vague idea, just an emotional slogan, that nobody really knows what this thing is, and it suddenly materializes as a result of breakdown of negotiations at the top during those mad months in 1947. It happens, and the people at large, the unsuspecting millions, have to pay the price, a very brutal price, for the failures at the top. What I'm arguing is that rather than being a very vague idea, Pakistan is understood, it's discussed, debated, threadbare, and broadly speaking, the Muslim League presents Pakistan as the ideal Islamic state, only the second Islamic state that will be created in all of history, the first being the one created by the Prophet in Medina 1300 years earlier, that this is going to be the largest and the most powerful Islamic state in the world, and that this is going to be the worthy successor to the defunct Ottoman Caliphate, which had dropped the baton of the leadership of the global community of Muslims at the end of World War I. So Pakistan is going to pick up that baton and emerge as the next leader of the Islamic world. Now this is a part of the book. The other part also has to do with a pushback against the Muslim League's agenda and program. And in this regard, what I do highlight is that there is a tremendous amount of debate within the Indian Muslim community on the question of Pakistan. And so what I do is I highlight the contributions of the critics of Pakistan. And so the book is in a way organized in terms of a series of intra-Muslim debates on the question of Pakistan. And a final point, quite often we think about Mr. Jinnah as a secular figure. Jinnah साहब तो बहुत secular आदमी थे, वो सूट पहनते थे, दारू पीते थे, कुत्ते पालते थे, so on and so forth. That he never went to mosque, he never did Hajj, he wasn't bearded, he was a very secular human being. And the Pakistan that he wanted to create was going to be more of Muslim majority state, but nonetheless a secular state. But what I try to highlight is also the fact that Mr. Jinnah, being a rather consummate politician, on the one hand he's speaking with a rather folk tongue. So if on the one hand he talks about Pakistan in terms of a parliamentary democracy of some kind, a liberal democracy of some kind, on the other hand he also talks about Pakistan in terms of an Islamic state, the Sharia being the source of law in Pakistan, the Pakistani flag being given to them by the Prophet, Pakistan's economy to be organized along Islamic lines rather than a capitalist or socialist line, so on and so forth. And the second point is that the Muslim League leadership, Mr. Jinnah, Mr. Liaquat Ali Khan and others, they forged a fairly close relationship with the ulama, who theorized Pakistan indeed as an ideal Islamic state. And what you see during the campaign for Pakistan is an intertwining of the vocabulary of the ulama and the Muslim League leadership, intertwining both secular and religious concerns to make the most popular arguments for the creation of Pakistan. I think I'll stop.
Well, thank you. I think they are interesting points that you've already raised, particularly about the role of ulama. We'll come back to that. but perhaps get an interesting perspective from Dilip about what you have imagined is the process by which Pakistan was conceived, created, and how that reflects upon our understanding of history, particularly of people who've seen history in larger terms, described as a leftist Marxist understanding of the process.
Thank you. I'll try to focus on what I think is the significance of Venkat's book, rather than go into the whole issue of partition or not, which is of course deserving of many discussions and should be discussed. I'll start off by saying that I recognized immediately, Venkat is a relatively recent friend of mine. Most of my friends go back, for many, many decades. But Venkat, I've got to know only since 2012 when I attended a seminar by him in Murthy. And then he had not finished his book, he was working on it, and I immediately recognized that this is a very important piece of research. And subsequently we became friends, and he was kind enough to show me his draft, and I went through it. So I, having not been associated with his research, I very quickly became familiar with the depth of research. So the first thing I'll say is that this is a very, very seminal contribution to the historiography of Indian nationalism. I say this as a historian, and with some due regard to the status of Indian historiography, which is good. I mean, it's regarded in the world. People like Shumit Sarkar and Ashish Nandi have recognized the value of this book. The second thing I'll say is that, by the sheer nature of the resources that he has consulted, which were not consulted before, because for example, most of the work on partition or the politics before partition has been focused on high politics. So the focus, the vision is on 1946-47, and cabinet mission is a favorite escape route for everybody who wants to find some kind of justification or some kind of stick with which to beat the Congress and say, actually Congress did it, Patel did it, Nehru did it, Gandhi did it, Jinnah is relatively innocent in the whole matter. This is a massive act of legerdemain. And it's only when you study it in greater detail, even the cabinet mission, we just use this word. There's a very interesting report on the cabinet mission written in 1946 by none other than Ramesh Chandra, who was a communist leader who just died a few months ago. And he said this is a scheme for Princestan, making a Princestan, because all the princely states will be left independent, and there will be a British. Someone mentioned earlier in the morning about how the British had a big role to play. They had a role to play, and the cabinet mission was not a scheme for the independence of India. It was a scheme to use the struggle for independence and the work of the Muslim League for their own interests. I mean, that's a separate story altogether. It will warrant many discussions. But I will just say that this book, therefore, is a contribution to a very tricky area. Now, as I was saying, the focus has always been on high politics, as if all the answers can be found there. And of course, the focus has always been, given our mindset, who is guilty? Now, one very interesting question with those people who tend to be apologetic about Jinnah and the Muslim League is that if Pakistan was such a great thing, then why are you blaming people? You should actually congratulate them. People like Patel and Nehru and all, if they are responsible, then you should be very thankful and grateful and say, thank you, you achieved something for us. See, that should be the approach, right? Then even the argument about two-nation theory, if people say, oh, you did the two-nation theory, all right. The first thing is it correct theory? Regardless of who's responsible for it, is it correct? That's the issue. Now, Venkat's book derails this whole thing and gets into discussing the popular campaigns in the press, the Urdu press. He learnt up Urdu fluently. He examined all the press, he examined the journals, the literature, and he shows that there was a wide-ranging debate in Indo-Muslim society. It was not just confined to the English medium and English-speaking lawyers at the top. And these are things we don't want to confront. There was a mass popular debate. Of course, it's true there was limited franchise, and therefore all Muslims didn't have a chance to vote. All Hindus didn't have a chance to vote. Okay. But still, even though Hindus didn't have a chance to vote, there was a national movement in the country which involved people. Whether they had voted or didn't vote. Now, what Venkat what really astonished me, I shouldn't have been astonished. After his work began to be discussed more and come out more, is the sheer scale of the animus that it aroused. And as a historian, I can say, look, if you confronted with good, solid research, you cannot, jump into your animus and start accusing him of being, of having bias and so on. But he's been accused of having bias, and he has. And this is how I found it from academic personalities, people whom I respect. Oh, so in short, what I'm saying, since we are speaking forthrightly here, let me put it very plainly. We still work with stereotypes. We use concepts like the Muslims, the Sikhs, the Hindus. We still have language like the Sikhs killed Indira Gandhi, whereas actually 2 Sikhs killed Indira Gandhi. The Sikhs didn't. Alright? So we'll talk like this. We still talk like this. So this kind of language and this kind of attitude enters into historiography. So when someone is criticizing Muslim League politics, you think they're criticizing Muslims as a whole. Damn it, if I criticize Hindutva, it does not mean I criticize Hindus as a whole. If I criticize Zionism, it doesn't mean I'm anti-Semitic. We cannot think like this. Otherwise, we reduce all thought process and all truth to sort of clumps of communities, as if there's one is your truth, one is my truth, and never the twain shall meet. Then we cannot have a discussion. So this I found entered into the attitude to Venkat's book. And I was quite astonished, and therefore I supported him all the more. And I can say that this is a book which will yield very rich dividends to anyone who bothers to read it. I found even people commenting, scholars commenting on his book, think this is a very dangerous book. I could make out from their comments that they hadn't even read past 2 chapters. Secondly, it doesn't say that the Muslim community was a monolith. Actually, he's being accused of doing the opposite of what he's done. If anyone wants to show that the Muslim community had very strong voices within the theologians also, who opposed Jinnah, opposed Muslim communal politics, and paid the price for it, and died for it, he's shown it. All you have to do is read the bloody book. So my problem is that this is what really shocked me. So I don't want to take up too much time. There's certain other aspects which I'd like to talk about when the conversation unfolds. But I'd like him specially to focus on Sayyid Ahmad Sajjad and Maulana Harbi, which are 2 of the alims, there are many others who I just referred to tell us something about their views on what happened. And there's another dimension altogether which I'll refer to, which is Ambedkar's position on Pakistan, which again none of us like to go there. We don't like to go there. It just takes one click. You can find the whole book on thoughts on Pakistan, but it's very, very unease-making. And then the other is the Communist Party of India's position in 1942. Again, we don't like to go there. And both documents are easily available. Thank you.
That's a wonderful, I think, wonderful way of nudging Venkat into what really seems to be the plan for the next book. So beyond Medina, perhaps return to Mecca. But let me just say that, just add to what Dilip said. You provided evidence of the very intense debates that happened amongst the ulama, particularly when Deoband split. Also, you have touched upon Maulana Azad, but the distinction between Jinnah and Azad, if we could hear a little bit more about that. And finally, what were the cracks, perhaps right from the beginning, with the reservations that people like Raja Mahmudabad had, and were they cracks that finally disappeared, or were they those cracks that remained permanently in Pakistan?
Thank you, both Salman and Dilip, for your prompts, and I'll try to kind of address all of the questions that kind of thrown at me. To begin with, the first thing that needs to be remembered is that Mr. Jinnah and the Muslim League claim that Pakistan is going to be an Islamic state. Now, how do they defend this Islamic state? Because the first thing that is said is that this Islamic state that you're going to create, the first critique is, who's Mr. Jinnah to lead the Muslims into this glorious Islamic utopia? वो तो नमाज भी नहीं पढ़ते हैं. He is himself quite an unobservant Muslim. And two, the other thing which is attacked is the justifications that are provided for the creation of this Islamic state. Now the first thing that the Muslim League tells you is that, sure, the partitioning of India is going to lead to substantial minority populations on either side. There's going to be a substantial number of Muslims in Hindu India. And similarly, there's going to be a substantial number of non-Muslims who will be in Pakistan. Now, what is going to be taking care of the security of minorities on both sides? And one of the first things that the Muslim League tom-toms about, and this comes right from Mr. Jinnah at the top to the district secretary of the Muslim League in a place like Badayun or in Bareilly, what comes to be known as the hostage population, that in case, let's say India, Muslims in Hindu India are going to be oppressed or beaten or there's violence upon them, retributive violence is going to be inflicted upon the non-Muslim minorities in Pakistan. And this is said in many, many forums. The second thing which is also talked about is that in case there is a case of oppression of Muslims in Hindu India, Pakistan will go to war with India, go to international bodies, and Mr. Jinnah himself says that just like Britain during Gladstone's time could intervene in Armenia for the protection of its minorities, why can't we do the same? Now, the ulama from the Deoband school, who kind of are the fiercest critics of Mr. Jinnah, and you have to remember that these are the only people who are hitting the ground and actually trying to push back against the League's propaganda, because most of the Congress leadership is in prison after 1942, Quit India movement. Everybody is in prison except Rajaji. And the criticism of people like Sayyid Muhammad Sajjad Bihari, who was the man who founded the Imarat-e-Sharia, still exists in Patna, or somebody like Hifzur Rahman Sewharvi, who is an important functionary of the Jamiat al-Ulama in Delhi. I would like to kind of talk a little bit about the critiques. The first thing that Sajjad Bihari and his critique of the Lahore resolution comes within 4 weeks of the passing of the Lahore resolution. And Sajjad Bihari says, how can you threaten innocent citizens who may be Hindus or Sikhs in Pakistan just because there may be some incidents of violence against Muslims in India? First of all, the Sharia doesn't in any way condone that kind of behavior against innocent civilians. And two, there is no precedent of any kind in the history of international relations of any state having behaved in such a manner. So who are you selling this snake oil to? The second thing that the ulama, the nationalist ulama as they're called, they criticize this idea that Pakistan can go to war with India to defend its minorities. He says, well, look at the history of international relations. You have, in the case of Palestine, you know what is happening. But has Turkey gone to war with any of the European powers for the sake of its Palestinian subjects? Or what has happened in Albania? Nothing is being done by the Islamic world at large. Forget going to war, they are not even able to provide diplomatic notices to Britain or any of these powers who are responsible for some of these things. The ulama then go on to destroy the viability of Pakistan itself. They say that, how is Pakistan going to be even viable? It's not going to be economically viable. It could collapse as soon as it is born, or at best survive as a satellite of either Britain or the United States. Two, there's going to be political and social instability. Indeed, this hostage population theory will simply not work in Pakistan's, in the case of Pakistan, because you look at the enormous Muslim, non-Muslim minority, it's about 43 or 45% on either side. It could probably work in the case of Hindu India, where the Muslims would be reduced to a very minuscule minority of about 10%. How are we going to oppress or beat up 45% Hindu minority in East or West Pakistan? Similarly, there is a whole lot of arguments that are put forth to show how Pakistan would be an absolute disaster. Okay. Okay, yeah, as far as, you referred to the Raja of Mahmudabad. The Raja of Mahmudabad is, one of the idealists, as far as Pakistan is concerned, sees this as an Islamic utopia, only the second one which is going to be created in global history, the first one having been created by the Prophet in Medina, and the second one we're going to create it in Pakistan. And in fact, Medina and Pakistan are used interchangeably in Muslim League rhetoric. So on the one hand, it is said that the Prophet created the first Pakistan in Medina, we're going to create the second Pakistan in the Indian subcontinent, or the second Medina in the Indian subcontinent, and vice versa. The Prophet created the first Pakistan in Arabia, we're going to create the second Pakistan in the Indian subcontinent. But the Raja of Mahmudabad very soon realizes that the Shias really don't have much of a place, or their position is going to be fairly insecure. In fact, by 1945 itself, he writes a letter to Jinnah, which I quote in my book, in which he says that, let's forget all these slogans about the Hukumat-e-Ilahiyya and stuff. Let's just keep it as a liberal democratic secular state. And he points out why. He says that this new party which has been set up by this man by the name of Maulana Shabbir Ahmad Usmani, another figure about whom we really don't hear anything about in partition historiography, but you need to remember this is a man who literally buries Jinnah. He presides over Mr. Jinnah's state burial, which is done according to Sunni fashion after the private ceremony is done according to Shia rituals. He's also the man who is responsible for the objectives resolution that is passed by the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, and I'm sure you know what the objectives resolution is about. No, it says that, sovereignty is, sovereignty belongs to Allah, but it kind of, this assembly or whatever will exercise it in the name of Allah, so on and so forth. So in a way, it kind of tilts Pakistan quite firmly, fairly early on, in the direction of being an Islamic state. Now, Shabbir Ahmad Usmani starts the party known as the Jamaat Ulema-e-Islam, which is still one of the two Islamist parties in Pakistan, the other being the Jamaat-e-Islami. And Shabbir Ahmad Usmani creates this body of clerics who are advising the Muslim League, and they do not take in any Shias on that. The Shias are kept out. And Shabbir Ahmad Usmani is a very interesting figure, because I like to tell this story about how he kind of visualizes Pakistan. Shabbir Ahmad Usmani says that, okay, we know Mr. Jinnah as Qaid-e-Azam, great leader. But he says, well, that is a very specific title that has been given to the man, because, he is among us the most fearless in the field of politics and constitutional law, and therefore he is going to be the best representative of the community when it comes to dealing with the Congress and the British in these complex constitutional negotiations. But Jinnah, his role is going to be confined to that. And he gives an example. He says, recently the American wrestler Zbyszko came to India. We didn't send Gandhiji to fight Zbyszko. We didn't send Jinnah to fight Zbyszko. I myself didn't go. We sent the wrestler Gama to fight him. And of course, Gama floors him within a minute or a few minutes. Similarly, Mr. Jinnah's role is going to be confined to the sphere of constitutional negotiations. And here he comes up with another brilliant metaphor. Talk about what is Mr. Jinnah and his folks' role going to be after the creation of Pakistan. He says that Muslims, we go on Hajj. And when we go on Hajj, we board these ships which are skippered by English captains. We get on board these ships, they go till the port of Jeddah. But they don't quite dock at the port. They kind of stop well before the port appears, because the English sea captain is not quite competent to negotiate the underwater rocks and shoals which are close to the port of Jeddah, and therefore he stops. So at that point in time, an Arab mariner from the shore comes on his little dhow or a boat, ascends on to the ship, and then guides this English sea captain to the port so that the ship can dock safely, the faithful can step onto holy land and then perform the Hajj. Usmani says, Mr. Jinnah is only like that English sea captain. He can only take that part. After that, it's us, the ulama, who are going to take over and lead Pakistan into that glorious Islamic.
Unfortunately, we now rely on GPS systems, so you don't need someone. We are running out of time, but you wanted to bring out some dimensions that are important.
Yeah, I just want to. This is important because maybe it can stay with you and you can look at it later. But I wrote a little piece in which I've of course incorporated Venkat's research also. It's called The Law of Killing: A Brief History of Indian Fascism. It was published a couple of years ago, but I am referring to it only because I see communalism as a version of fascism, and it doesn't matter which color, which flag it's by, all of it. Alright, but regardless of that, I want to point to two important documents. And the first one of those is one which I was aware of but had not studied. And that's typical of many of us historians. There are many crucial documents which we overlook, and I'm ashamed of it, but nonetheless, Venkat's research brought it sharply back into my focus, and I took care to read the whole book, which is Ambedkar's book called Thoughts on Pakistan. It was written in 1940, within a matter of 4 months of the Lahore Resolution. It's a brilliant book and it's a very disturbing book. And it's very disturbing because on the one hand he opposes, he says it's an insane idea, but the language he uses is essential. He talks about the Hindus and the Muslims and etc. And the brunt of the argument is that, let me put it very clearly, it's a good riddance theory. And that's why it's so disturbing to us. Because you see, we've reduced history to iconography. There are icons, we worship them or we denounce them. We don't really try to get at the piece of the matter. So that if anyone is really keen on understanding one of the most important intellectual contributions if anyone's keen on understanding that debate, this is a book that you just have to read. He added 3 chapters to it in 1945-46, which are also very fascinating. I'm just referring to it. It's a very disturbing book. And on the other hand, there is a document which I was referring to, which is the Communist Party of India's Adhikari resolution of 1942. And this resolution was passed exactly 1 week after the beginning of the start of the Battle of Stalingrad, which everyone knows was a life and death battle for the Soviet Union and the Red Army in the second. In fact, it's the turning point of the whole war, some people would argue. And this resolution came a week after that. Before this period, India was a nation in communist eyes. But in this resolution, now India is not a nation. India is a multinational empire like the Russians. And there are many nationalities. And what's very fascinating, I mean, this document is something that will give even Derrida a headache, to decipher. But what's interesting is that he says the nationalities, and he lists the nationalities, and among them there are Baloch, Punjabis, Sindhis, etc. And then in bracket, predominantly Muslim. And in the remainder, Rajputana, Karnataka, etc., it's not predominantly Hindu. So you're making what in philosophy is called a category mistake. You're mixing up linguistic and regional categories with the religious ones. And then he goes on to argue that the demand for Pakistan is a just and democratic demand. This line was taken by the Communist Party of India from 42 to 47. After which there is Israel. And many years later, in 64, the Communist Party of India, Adhikari himself said it was a right-wing deviation. I just want to bring it to your notice, the implications we can't discuss now.
Thank you very much. Although the time is not up for our relations in the subcontinent, but time's up for this debate. But just to keep the tradition alive, I think it's important that at least one question be asked of the author and have a reply, so then we can move on to things like tea and so on. One question, please. Unless you think the discussion has been so satisfying that you don't need a question. There's a question.
Could we have some question from the audience? Any other question?
Hello. Yeah. Okay.
I think, sir, what we do is, I'm sorry to interrupt. This gentleman has asked questions every session. Could we try and take? I'll personally come to Mr. Iyer for his first question.
Given the role of the ulama in opposing and then moderating Jinnah's view of Pakistan, how do you explain the fact that the party founded by Osmani has not won a single seat, and the Jamaat-e-Islami has only won 2 seats ever, and the 2 seats were won from Karachi, and they were the ones who were the keenest on getting the Indian consulate established in Karachi? How do you explain why the ulama so badly failed to leverage its role in the Pakistan movement after Pakistan was created?
Okay. No, the first thing one needs to remember is that the enormously influential or the enormous impact they have on the discourse itself, as far as the new nation is concerned, it far exceeds their numbers in terms of representational politics. So one of the first things that happens as a result of the fact that this two-nation theory, and in addition to the fact that Pakistan is imagined as an Islamic state, secularism as a state ideology, or secularism as an idea, gets delegitimized very quickly. So the term even in Pakistan for secularism is ladiniyat. It is against religion, so it's almost like akin to atheism. So they had an enormous impact on the language of politics as far as Pakistan is concerned, and that's where we need to kind of look at.
I'll just say one thing, that you see, sometimes ideas have a certain momentum and quality which overrides the social base or the social persons who may be articulating the ideas. So after a while, and for instance, we all know, you don't have to be a member of a particular RSS organization to have a certain set of communal ideas. You don't have to be a member of a communal organization to have communal ideas. I've seen, frankly, even people of left-wing persuasion with communal ideas. So that's not the issue. So I would say, but on the other hand, the weight of this ideology is very important. One of the earliest people to warn about what was happening, and again, this is something that we don't discuss, that Jinnah's first law and labour minister, Rabindranath Mandal, wrote an agonizing letter, and he's a man who stuck by the Muslim League through the Calcutta killings, and he was denounced by the Hindu community, denounced by the Hindu Mahasabha, denounced by everybody. He stuck by it because he knew that the Hindus of East Pakistan would need some representation. There was nearly a quarter of the population. He went there. He became Jinnah's first, some people say he was a poster boy, whatever it is. It shows that Jinnah seemed to have some inclination towards having a secular cabinet by putting this man in charge of law and labour. He writes an agonizing letter after Jinnah's death to Liaquat, saying that what is this objective resolution you are putting Allah in? Allah doesn't have any place in a democratic constitution. And then he describes, this letter is worth reading, it's available in the public sphere. He says what is happening in East Pakistan, and no longer is he talking as a representative of Namashudros. He's talking as a representative of Hindus, because Hindus are being systematically repressed. He says that Pakistan will be a hell for the minorities. And for the East Pakistani population, they are going to become a colony of the West Pakistanis. When did he say this? 1950. So this is a long story. Very many people say it only began with Ziaul Haq. No, I'm sorry, it didn't. Then there was what is his name? Jamaat founder? Maududi began an agitation, having opposed, but having gone to Pakistan, he began an agitation against Ahmadiyas.
some of the Ahmadiyya intellectuals had played a major role in the Muslim League politics, but they were all sidelined, and he succeeds. There is a riot in 1953, there is a Munir report comes out in 1954 saying this is how they are manipulating Muslim religion, and you know the plight of Ahmadiyyas afterwards. Today, if you apply for a passport in Pakistan, you have to give an official statement saying that Ahmadiyyas are non-Muslims. So I think the ideology has a stamina of its own.
Thank you very much. We're done, but shall I give a last word to Venkat, because I'm wondering whether all this will lead into a new book. Let him give us some hope.
Well, I think this book was on the ideological history of Pakistan, but the next book is going to be on the partition of itself, taking the all-India picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you that the book, Creating a New Medina, lend me your ears as we break for tea for about 20 minutes. But lend me your ears because this deserves mention, that the New Medina, the book that you see, another round of applause because it has been cited by Newsweek as the best book in global non-fiction in 2015 and described as a masterpiece, arguably the most important work of history published in 2015. What an honor. What an honor. It's available for you, ladies and gentlemen. Just pick it up and you can get it signed as a memoir for this book. 15 to 20 minutes. We are already beyond time, ladies and gentlemen, for tea. Come back and we have the first talk after this by none other than Mr. Montek Singh Ahluwalia, where we shall be celebrating 25 years of liberalized India. Ladies and gentlemen, a quick cup of tea and coffee and we assemble back in about sharp 20 minutes. We begin the next session. Thank you.